You're watching TheNameBrand, and today we're going to be talking about accessibility in video games. First, I'd like to talk about digital accessibility in gaming. Specifically, a topic that made the rounds in the media a while back, that being video games and their difficulty level. The idea: video games tend to have challenges. The developer typically has an idea of how they want the ideal player experience to pan out. They plan where the player should learn key concepts and building blocks, and slowly give them more mechanics to build off of. They balance the reward of winning and the work that it takes to get there. I imagine that the feelings of reward and accomplishment after the player overcomes large obstacles are typically calculated scenarios created by the developers. Some developers decide to have one difficulty for their games, and thus potentially have in mind one linear experience for all players. By doing this, are they limiting the number of players who can experience their game? From an article published on Forbes in March 2019, Dave Thiers states about a particularly hard game that an easy mode would allow an order of magnitude more players to see what the developer has built, and yet these experiences remained walled off for those millions of people for reasons that I just can't parse. Many games that have a difficulty system, if there's enemies to clobber, tend to follow the practice of having a few difficulty options that reduce or increase enemy health and damage taken from enemies. Is Dave right in saying that making an easy mode in games would be a blanket solution in relation to accessibility? I don't think so. For example, if certain games require quick reflexes and button mashing, this automatically makes the game difficult and in some cases impossible to play if you are physically limited regarding those sorts of events. By including certain tasks in games, they can alienate groups of people who might not be able to complete that task, barring them off of the content of the rest of the game. It's not usually a matter of enemy health or player health, it's the simple fact that some actions are physically required to be done, and for some, can't be done. In a spiritual follow-up article, The Washington Post in February 2020 published a collection of responses to Dave's article. One quote read, "Easy mode is a really blunt instrument," tweeted Hamilton in March. "It is worth looking at what the designer's intent is, what they want the players to experience. The question then becomes about how to avoid the barriers that prevent the player from experiencing what the designer wanted them to experience." I couldn't agree more. Alongside Hamilton, I add that implementing just an easy mode feels like a last-minute accessibility addition by developers. It doesn't directly address the problems that can arise if you have a disability. I think one better example of an accessibility fix can be read in the Washington Post article. The one-handed control option in Uncharted 4 was used by one-third, i.e. millions, of their players. Millions of players using a one-handed control option. Why don't we see more options like this in the industry if they're so widely used when they are included, whether used by abled or disabled alike? The article makes a similar statement about captions. Subtitles were turned off by default in Assassin's Creed Origins, and just over 60% of players turned them on. So, Ubisoft had them on by default in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and 95% of players left them on. When they did the same in Far Cry New Dawn, 97% of players left them on. I think in gaming we should see more accessibility settings like the one-handed control option before haphazardly throwing in an easy or hard mode. Sure, occasionally the budget might not warrant a few extra lines of code and whatever goes into that, but the demand is there, isn't it? If more people can play the game, more people will buy the game. Yeah? What I'm trying to get at is I think it's more important that people with disabilities can play video games. I think any development around accessibility should revolve around getting games into the hands of more players before we decide to make the game easier or harder as a whole. There are players who might not have a hand or who might have limited hand, wrist, arm functionality that limits them from playing a game or completing certain aspects of it. And while this is just a slice of the issues that could plague a disabled player, there are some controller solutions that could help. Which leads me to my next topic of physical accessibility. Perhaps the most widely known physical controller solution is the Xbox Adaptive Controller created by Microsoft. Released in 2018, it has fully customizable button inputs and can utilize switches with varying levels of sensitivity. The controller is an excellent step in the right direction of making gaming more inclusive. However, we also need to realize that while it will help a broad spectrum of people, it won't benefit every disability. It's a cool start for sure. There are other companies out there with other controller solutions, but nothing quite compares with Microsoft at the moment. So, with everything I've gone over in the video, I've got a quote that'll help wrap up my thoughts. In Archive and Anatomy of Disabled Myths by Dolmage, JT, we read that disabled people have become sensitized to depictions of disability in popular culture, religion, and history. These images are internalized by disabled and non-disabled people alike and build social stereotypes, create artificial limitations, and contribute to discrimination. It's as true in gaming as it is anywhere else. Accessibility in gaming is more of an afterthought than it should be, and it's contributing to the overarching stereotype that gaming is just for the able-bodied. And perhaps there are some good exceptions, but I can't help but think that the majority of people haven't thought to consider disabled gamers. The larger the hobby becomes, the louder the collective voice of the disabled and their allies will become. Developers will eventually realize that there's a need for more accessibility options. The industry won't change overnight. It certainly won't change because of my video. But if we can just continue to keep the discussion going and lend our voices to those who want to see these kinds of changes, then surely we'll see the change eventually. Thanks for watching my video. Hope it's sparked your internal monologue. I'm out of here.